Welcome to Video 3 for the project to amend the City Zoning Ordinance. This presentation will cover changes to medium and high density residential zones. Before continuing, we encourage you to watch the 3.5-minute introductory video. Also, if at the end of this video you have further questions or are wondering about terms used that you might not be familiar with, we encourage you to contact a Planning Division staff member. Also, please keep in mind that in an effort to keep these presentations under 15 minutes long, you may find that we haven't covered something in as much depth as you would like. We encourage you to pause the presentation on slides that interest you and review the information on the screen, as it will typically be more in depth than we cover in the audio portion. This slide shows how we have proposed to convert existing zones. For the medium density zones, we are proposing to remove the R2A zone and combine it with the R2 zone. R2A really isn't used very often to begin with and doesn't provide very much distinction from the R2. We've also introduced the traditional neighborhood zone, which we will touch on in this video, but we'll cover more in depth in a separate presentation. The RMH, R3, and R3A zones are being left basically the same as they are today. For this video, we'll cover the standards for each zone and give a brief overview of the traditional neighborhood zone. The R2 zone really isn't changing very much from what it is today. It represents the combination of the current R2 and R2A zones. One of the features we think will make it much more usable is we've removed the restrictions on number of units per building. Currently, the R2 zone allows a maximum of a fourplex. If more units are desired, the zoning must be something different, like an R2A or an R3. But with those zones also comes a higher density allowance. Removing this restriction, but keeping the same maximum density of 17 units per acre, helps the R2 zone be more functional. We've also kept in the building height restriction of 24 feet, so this still works as a good transition zone from medium density to low density development as recommended by the comprehensive plan. The other change to this zone is the setbacks. The 30-foot front yard has been reduced to 20 feet, and the side yards have been changed from 8 inches for every foot of building height to a standard 6-foot minimum. These setbacks are illustrated in the images on the right-hand side of the screen. One of the new features to the zoning ordinance that we think is exciting is the introduction of the traditional neighborhood zone. It's a big enough change that we've dedicated a separate presentation to cover it in depth, but we also wanted to include a brief overview here. The reason for creating this zone was to recognize that much of the city's early residential development was done prior to any zoning in the city. Yet over the years, modern zoning standards have been applied to those properties with no thought as to how it would impact and restrict things like additions and new construction. The reality is the zoning ordinance currently treats an older home that you might find on the numbered streets the same as it would a new home on, say, the south of Sunnyside Road. Those are two very different types of development, and having the same standards really doesn't make sense. The standards in the traditional neighborhood zone are meant to reflect that early style of development, when lots were smaller, services were within a reasonable walking distance, and there was a common use of alleys for parking and utilities. You can see on the table of allowed uses on the right-hand side of the screen that there are a mix of housing and commercial uses that would be allowed. Each use would be limited in size and include standards on placement, height, etc. to make sure they fit well within the neighborhood. For more information on this zone, please make sure to check out our presentation on the traditional neighborhood. The RMH zone, or residential manufactured home, is designed for manufactured home subdivisions, mobile home parks, or travel trailer parks. We really aren't changing the standards of this zone. Minor changes have been made, but they are relative to how the zone works within the overall code. Densities, setbacks, etc. remain the same. The R3 zone is also remaining basically unchanged. Densities and setbacks remain the same, but the most notable change is in the allowed uses. Currently, the R3 zone allows many commercial uses through a conditional use permit process. Because the R3A zone also allows these uses through a conditional use permit, it seemed more appropriate to only allow them in the R3A in order to create some distinction between the two zones. This allows the R3 zone to still function as a residential-only zone. Otherwise, the R3 zone remains the same as what it is today. The R3A zone also remains much the same as it is today. R3A allows not only higher density residential development, but also professional offices and some personal services such as salons. As mentioned on the previous slide, it will also allow some limited commercial uses through a conditional use permit. You can see the uses listed on the left-hand side of the screen. Those uses with a C next to them require the conditional use permit. In terms of densities, setbacks, and building heights, the R3A zone remains the same as it is today. Thank you again for viewing this presentation on medium and higher density residential zones. We hope that you found it informative and helpful. This section of code really hasn't changed very much because it seems to have functioned fairly well over the years. We have tried to address those issues that we know about and that are specified in the comprehensive plan. We again encourage you to take a few more minutes to view the presentation on the traditional neighborhood zone so you can learn more about it in detail. Again, please feel free to contact our staff. We would be happy to answer your questions and hear your thoughts on this important issue. Please also consider taking a look at our other video presentations on the rest of the zoning ordinance.